Continuing the New Orleans Saints discussion, we'll do so with our guy Ken Trahan, CrescentCitySports.com joins us now. Ken, how you doing this morning?
Hey, Jacob, doing fine. Thank you.
Hey, glad to have you on. A lot of stuff going on in the New Orleans Saints world. Before we get to the quarterback question, obviously you make a move there at safety. You get Marcus Maye from the New York Jets. Now you do lose Marcus Williams, obviously, which seemed like it was always going to happen. He signs 5 years, $70 million with the Ravens. But you get a player in Marcus Maye, 3 years, $28.5 million. Last year, missed time because he had an ankle injury, then he had Achilles tear there in November, so only played 6 games. The film didn't look as good last year as it looked 2 years ago, but what do you make of this move, Marcus Maye coming to the Saints, 3 years, $28.5 million?
Well, I think they're looking at a player who they feel like is still young in the game. Maye has, of course, only been in the league for 5 years, but as you mentioned, the Achilles injury has to be a concern. We saw Quan Alexander and how he was able to mitigate that and come back faster than anybody expected this past year, and I'm thinking that they feel like he's ahead of schedule just looking at where he's at right now. Look, it's a financial deal. It's that simple. When you look at Marcus Williams, they couldn't afford to pay that. And when you look at Marcus Maye, they could afford to pay that. So you're getting a little bit poorer version of sorts, but you're getting a guy that is a competent, solid player. You know, he's a guy that probably tackles better than Marcus Williams overall, but doesn't make as many plays. He's got 6 picks in 5 seasons in the league and 4 forced fumbles. So he's not been a turnover guy by and large, but he's a solid guy and can be a glue guy. So I think they look at it strictly from a financial perspective. Probably the thing that is a little bit disconcerting is the fact that last year, with all the issues they had with money, they chose to tag Marcus Williams and they let Trey Hendrickson walk. Well, Hendrickson, of course, had another incredible season this past year with the Bengals, and now you don't have either one of them, right? Because Williams walked as well.
So when you look at the moves that the Saints have made, now getting Roby back was very interesting. It kind of goes under the radar a little bit, right? He kind of was announced at the same time. I think we all thought that he was going to be released because he had, around a $10 million cap hit. They're able to restructure his deal. You gave up a third rounder for him a year ago, a veteran cornerback in this league. Paulson Adebo played outstanding, but look, if you can get a guy like this at the right price, this is kind of an under-the-radar move that I really like by the Saints.
Well, he's a competent player. I mean, the guy's been a solid performer for the 8 years of his NFL career. And, Paulson Adebo played really well last year, so Roby kind of flew below radar. He played in 14 games, only started once, had an interception over the course of the season. But he's a guy that they know they can put out there, and he can cover a 2 or a 3. And they feel pretty confident about that. You can never have enough good corners. That's the oldest axiom in the NFL, as you know.
Yep.
And then, of course, the other part of that is stocking up, because at some point, if in fact you do make a quarterback deal, you're going to have to give up some significant assets, and it's probably not just going to be draft picks.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, maybe even a player like a Paulson Adebo, who is a young player, third rounder, so obviously the salary would be very low, be intriguing to a lot of NFL teams. And when you pull up the depth chart and you're starting looking at the Saints, Ken, it's like, man, that defense is starting to really take shape. And we knew it would. We knew it was a very talented defense already, but you're making moves, getting players in. Dennis Allen going to be the head coach, continue to still be very involved with that defense. So that's great. All that sounds really, really good. Then you go to the other side of the depth chart and you look at the offense, and there's so many question marks. How long is Kamara going to be out with the suspension? What does Michael Thomas look like right now? Because it sounds good right now that he's ready to go, and he does seem like he's locked in, but you have to wait and see. Who's going to be the number 2, 3 receiver? Who's going to be tight end? Adam Troutman, his best work's come in the run game, not the pass game. Obviously, the offensive line, Armstead. So question marks all over the place, and certainly the quarterback question is going to be the biggest of those question marks. So kind of where do you feel the Saints are leaning right now? Because the Deshaun Watson stuff, it felt like it came out of nowhere. I mean, as soon as everything happened over the weekend, here comes the Saints. So they're definitely interested in it. The Falcons, the Browns, there's other teams that are in play here as well. So where do you think the chances of the Saints landing Deshaun Watson stand right now?
I would say they're pretty good. I wouldn't say they're great. I'd say they're pretty good. It's obvious that the two sides are interested in each other, and that's the most important thing, because he has a no-trade clause. And anywhere he goes, he's going to have to sign off on it. And by all accounts, he apparently would sign off on coming to New Orleans. And on the field, this guy's an elite player. I mean, at worst, he's a top 10 quarterback. At his very best, he could be a top 5 guy. I mean, the numbers don't lie. And all you needed to do is watch him play in Houston, as I know you did, and you saw what he could do. The guy can make every throw imaginable. He played a great game in New Orleans against the Saints at one point, too. The guy's made 3 Pro Bowls in 4 years. And you look at his completion percentage, the last year he played, he was a 70% guy. He's pushing 69 for his career. It's exactly what you're looking for. He throws touchdowns. And, oh, by the way, his yards per catch led the NFL the last time he played in 2020. So it's not like he's dinking and dunking. I mean, this is a guy that can make all the throws. This is a guy that understands the game. And up until what transpired a year and a half, 2 years ago, by all accounts, this guy was a perfect citizen. He was well loved at Clemson, highly admired. All you heard about was how good a guy he was, and certainly having interviewed him at one of the national championship game situations, he was that guy too. And then you talk to Dabo Swinney, you got the same thing. And in Houston, you heard nothing but that. And then, of course, all the stuff hits the fan with the whole massage parlor situation. And, as I wrote at CrescentCitySports.com, innocent until proven guilty. He's been cleared criminally. Much like Jameis Winston had been cleared criminally back in the day. And second chances are essential in life. If you want to talk about third, fourth chances, that's a different story. But ultimately, sexual assault is a different animal altogether. If that proves to be true, then absolutely, positively no tolerance whatsoever for that. So, but by law, you're talking about, there's similarities between he and Jameis Winston and what's happened in their lives and what's gone on off the field. So I think you have to look at that too. And it's pretty interesting because a lot of Saints fans like Jameis Winston. And they're willing to forgive whatever transgressions he may have been part of in the past, and yet maybe not the same for Watson at this point. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic. It's been my experience, though, as you know, is if somebody comes in and plays well and has success, everything else is forgotten about pretty quickly.
So obviously with everything, still surrounding, and there's still some questions about it, would the league suspend Deshaun Watson, what could come out in the civil cases, all that type of stuff. But like when you look at what Denver gave up to get Russell Wilson, I mean, 3 1s, multiple 2s, a player like a Noah Fant. I think Noah Fant's a really good football player. He was a first-round pick. I thought last year he had times where, he would be their main option because when the receivers weren't playing well, Noah Fant, kind of became that F in the slot that would go and make plays. But it seems like Deshaun Watson, because of everything we just talked about, not going to get the same package, even though he is a much younger version of Russell Wilson. Seems like that, you're still going to have to give it the 1s, but maybe the other stuff, the secondary stuff, the 2s, the 3s, and maybe another player added into this won't have to be the level that the Broncos just gave up to get Russell Wilson.
Yeah, the Saints did receive 2 compensatory picks, most recently, both third-round picks, so you have that capital to play with also. But certainly I think it's going to end up being multiple number 1s. If they make a deal, it's going to be at least 2 of those, and then other value. I can't imagine it being anything less. In the case of Deshaun Watson, he doesn't have the Super Bowl on the wall like Russell Wilson has, but as you mentioned, he's a little bit of a younger version, except probably better arm talent and younger. So I think from that perspective, he's more attractive, but it becomes a matter of whether or not you have the assets to pull it off. And I think the Saints have seen the model of what Tampa Bay did with Tom Brady, and they've seen the model of what the Rams did with Matt Stafford. They themselves went all in with Drew Brees in 2020, and of course he was a banged-up version, and they didn't get it done. But Tampa Bay did it with Brady. It paid off. They won a Super Bowl. The Rams did it with Stafford. It paid off. They won a Super Bowl. The instant gratification crowd certainly looks at that and says, can't that be us? Well, the only way that's going to be you is if you have that elite guy at the most important position on the field. And Deshaun Watson certainly can't be that guy on the field.
I mean, when you look at his potential landing spots, Ken, I mean, you went in NFC South, and we said it right before you came on, that potentially was going to have Sam Darnold, Matt Ryan at 36, 37 years old, and you were going to have maybe Kyle Trask, Tampa Bay, and now all of a sudden you got Tom Brady back.
Yeah.
It really feels like Deshaun Watson, one way or the other, is going to end up in the South, either Panthers, Saints, or the Falcons, right? So you're adding Deshaun Watson to the division. I mean, it kind of changed overnight, and I think that's why it's so imperative the Saints, if they do feel like this is their guy, you have to go get him, because if you don't, it really feels like the Panthers or the Falcons are going to be the top suitors, and they're going to have an opportunity to grab him. Then you're going to have to face him twice a year.
Yeah, as we like to say in the industry, that's called burying the lead, because that's what I was going to start with, is the fact that when the primary suitors are yourself and 2 primary rivals, as much as anything, you don't want those rivals to get hold of that asset. So with that in mind, I think it just puts more of an emphasis on trying to acquire Watson. And I'll say it again, for all those that are skeptical and for all those that are extremely negative, and there's been a lot of negative response to it. Oh, no, hell no, we don't want this guy. And with all of his problems. I completely respect and understand that. I really do. And yet, as in every scenario in life today, you have to let situations play themselves out. A grand jury refused charges against the gentleman, and he freely testified yesterday, by the way. So we'll see. Bottom line is, and then there's the NFL, because even after it's all over with, when civil suits are complete, regardless of how many take place, the league can take action too. You already got Alvin Kamara facing a suspension, and now you might have a quarterback that you bring in facing a suspension as well. So there's a lot of ifs in this situation. There's a lot of risk in this situation, but somebody told me a long time ago, it's the risk takers that ultimately get the biggest payoff, if in fact it does pay off. So look, you can play it conservatively. Play with what you have. Jameis Winston was a very competent player for the 7 games he played in last year. They went 4-2, and then they won the 5th game he started, but he left the game injured in the second quarter, and Simeon came in and played the rest of that one. We all know the 14 touchdowns, 3 picks, but we also know the 59% completion percentage, and we know the history. So what we saw of that sample size was positive, and a guy I think that can go out and run your team and win games. I really believe that. The question is this a better option for you? And my answer to that would be, if you're just comparing apples to oranges, Deshaun Watson is clearly a better quarterback than Jameis Winston.
All right, last one. Ken Trahan, CrescentCitySports.com is our guest. You mentioned Kamara, a lot of uncertainty there as far as what his suspension is going to look like. Marcus Maye also coming in with a possible suspension, gets a DUI in February, doesn't tell anyone. The Jets find out in October. I mean, are we expecting him to miss some time at the beginning of the season as well? Again,
another one of those gray areas. We saw what happened with Lattimore last year, right? And obviously we just kept waiting, and what happened? So you just don't know what the league's thinking in every one of these situations. It's kind of like, Will Wade situation. You sat and waited for 3 years before something finally transpired. Well, in this situation, you kind of are on pins and needles and waiting to find out what happens. Last thing you want is for 2 or 3 key guys to have suspensions, because that's going to be hard to make up when you're without those guys and you got to play with other guys and you're trying to mitigate damage and win games in the NFL. It's tough, especially without Kamara. They don't win games without Kamara. And on the defensive side, they don't win games without C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Yep.
I think we saw that last year in both of those instances. They were irreplaceable guys. So, yeah, I think that certainly is a concern. It has to be when you look at what transpires. And again, you got off seasons and you got scenarios where guys get involved in things, and you just hope and pray that they don't make bad decisions that put them in harm's way. Unfortunately, the Saints have had to deal with that over the last couple of years with a few guys: Deontay Harris, Alvin Kamara, obviously, of course, Marshawn Lattimore, as I mentioned. You mentioned Maye. So, yeah, there's always some of these things to deal with, and certainly that's the case once again.
All right, there he is, our guy, Ken Trahan, CrescentCitySports.com. Ken, we always appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Jacob. My pleasure.
All right, we will take a break. We've obviously been NFL heavy. We've got some other stuff to get to. LSU baseball gets a win last night. LSU basketball tournament game coming up on Friday. Stick around, more OTB when we come back.